to get our targets when it comes to the Paris Agreement, we need the decarbonization of the mobility sector in particular. And if you look into the mobility sector, transportation sector, you see that the road mode is also one of the biggest emittents there. Therefore, we have to go this way on alternative infrastructure or the alternative fuels infrastructure. We tried that 2014 with the first legislation or with the pre-legislation called RFID, Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive at that time. So it was not so successful, to be honest. That was also the reason why we have lost 5 to 6 years in deploying infrastructure. The member states, they did do their homework at that time. And it was a good step by the European Commission to include this RFIR as a regulation now into the Fit for 55 package. What we have achieved is we will have now a minimum level on infrastructure all around the European Union. We will have some alternative fuels infrastructure for cars, for light-duty vehicles, but also for heavy trucks. We have also include the hydrogen technology into this legislation. We have also included the data of the data use and the so-called national access points. We will connect them on a European level in order to give all the participants the opportunity to use the database in order to offer better services for the people all around. We have also included the payment, the card payments, which will be obligatory as of 2025. For all those people who use electric cars, they will have the opportunity to pay by credit card or even by debit card. And we have also included maritime, the onshore electricity supply for maritime, the same, the shoreside electricity for aircrafts, for airplanes, and we have included the mode rail also. It does mean the railway should also have the opportunity to get some infrastructure and to use these new technologies for the future, which will be mostly without any CO2 emission. In a nutshell, this is what we have achieved. What we did not achieve is so-called sanction mechanism, which would have put more pressure on the member states to overcome or to deploy the infrastructure. But now we will start next week with the trilogues under the Czech presidency, and I think we did our job as European Parliament in a very fast-track way, and now it's up to the member states also to get in touch with us and in order to bring this legislation through. Thank you so far.
Thank you. Before giving the floor to Mr. Warburn, just to remind for those who are connecting online, if you want to ask a question, then click the raised hand button, and then we will come back to you after all the presentations are made. So now, Mr. Warburn, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I will talk about the FuelEU Maritime file, which, of course, is the Fit for 55 initiative that will decarbonize the maritime sector. This regulation, it builds on two pillars. The main one establishes greenhouse gas intensity limits for maritime fuels, and this will force the ship operators to gradually reduce the climate impact of their fuels. The second pillar obliges ferries, cruise ships, container vessels to connect to onshore power supply when at berth in TEN-T ports. In combination, these two measures will make sure that the maritime transport does its part in reaching the targets laid down in the climate law. It was an overwhelming majority we achieved in plenary today, with 451 votes in favour, 137 votes against, and 54 abstentions. Parliament rejected all amendments and safeguarded every single letter of the deal we had in the Transport Committee. This is, of course, a big win for our committee, and I'm very grateful towards the shadow rapporteurs who helped us secure this massive majority, especially to Vera Tax of S&D, to Elsi Katainen of Renew, Marco Campomenosi of ID, and Johan von Overfelt of ECR. We did cooperate on this far, and now we lay out the world's by far most ambitious pathway to maritime carbonization. This legislation is ambitious, yet it is realistic, because we need to take into many different perspectives into account when we regulate such a complex sector as the maritime sector. On climate, of course, very important, but not just setting the most extreme targets that might look good on paper, because we have to focus, and I think we have focused on real enforceability, making sure that things actually happen in reality. Also thinking of social aspects, protecting jobs, because 75% of all our exports go by ship. We also secure connectivity for people living on islands in coastal areas and outermost regions. We shield the most vulnerable families from rising prices, so safeguarding the maritime sector's competitiveness and making sure there won't be carbon leakage or jobs loss in Europe. My guiding principle has been to ensure that we get the biggest emissions savings possible per euro spent. We do that with a very effective scope. We target 90% of the maritime CO2 emissions, while shielding the very smallest ship owners and ports from massive economic and bureaucratic burdens. We do it with a phase-in that is rapid but realistic, and we do it with a target-oriented design where we set a pathway forward with strict greenhouse gas limits, but without micromanaging ship owners or forcing them into some kind of one-size-fits-all. We leave to them whether to choose e-methanol, hydrogen, advanced biofuels, or large-scale wind propulsion, or something else, because I think there will be a massive technological development the years ahead. Just to mention briefly some of the main new elements from the Parliament. We have increased the overall climate ambitions by tightening the greenhouse gas intensity limits. We maintain the first 10 years unchanged, giving the industry some breathing space, but then we have a significantly more ambitious trajectory. The greenhouse gas intensity fuels in 2050 will be reduced by 80%. Furthermore, we introduced an RFNBO subquota of 2% from 2030. This is stricter than the subquota imposed by RED, which is 1.2%, and this will send a very strong signal to the market to invest heavily in e-fuel production. Then we streamline the FuelEU with AFIR, making sure the obligations to connect to onshore power only applies to 10T ports, not all ports like the Commission proposed. This is extremely important because with this we won't force the smallest ports to make multi-million investments that will almost never be used. We introduced some targeted and time-limited exemptions to give some extra time to adapt for outermost regions, small islands, and companies operating under public service obligation to secure the connectivity to sparsely populated or isolated areas. And to end this list of changes, and with my personal favorite, I have to say, we apply the one-in principle. We introduced an article on compensatory regulatory reduction, forcing the Commission to offset the regulatory burdens from this regulation by removing existing burdens for the sector. This, I think, is very important so that the sector can focus on their main businesses and on decarbonisation. In summary, this regulation will kickstart the development of the sector, and I'm very happy that the Parliament decided to give such a strong support for our compromise proposal, because it is an urgent file to move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see we have already questions online, but before moving to that, I'm just checking the room, if there will be any questions in the room. It doesn't seem to be the case, so we will start with Mr. Lucas Shade. If you could introduce yourself, media you are presenting, and the question you are addressing, and for speaking, just press the speak button. Thank you.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Lucas Scheid for Europe Table. I have a question to Mr. Ertug. You just mentioned that the previous legislation, AFID, wasn't very successful. And one of the reasons you said before was that the member states watered down the proposal. What makes you think that this time with A4 it will be different in trilogues?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. This time we have regulation, and last time it was a directive. I think this is from the quality difference, so it's a regulation. We have also included minimum requirements into this legislation. That does mean even if they don't meet their targets, what they could do, they have to deliver at least the minimum targets. We already spoke about that, the 3% or the 5% until 2030. And on the other hand side, to be honest, it's up to the member states. It's not anymore an issue that the money is not available. We have many funds available. We have the Connecting Europe facility, which offers these kind of investments, more than 1.5 billion euro. We have at the same time the Recovery and Resilience Fund with X billion euros. The member states, they can use, I guess, more than around 30% for the new technologies when it comes to these kind of things. They can use that money there. They also have the opportunity to use EIB funds and loans. I think this is not anymore an issue of money, so the money should be there. And we are talking here only about the public infrastructure. And at the same time, the industry is also behind this legislation, because they supported that too much, and thank you to them as well. Because in the end, if the member states don't deliver, the industry will be in fire, let me say it like that, because they have to fine or pay finally the fines for it. Therefore, I think all in all, it would make sense to go for this legislation, to install and deploy this infrastructure. And finally, we are doing that for our planet, for our kids, and for our grandkids later on.
Thank you. Now go to Justin. So Justin, press the speak button.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I have a question for Justin Stairs from the Maritime Watch, for the question for Mr. Warburton, please. I was wondering if you could indicate what subjects are likely to be at the heart of the trilogue discussions. I'm thinking about issues such as the GT threshold. Is there a danger of different thresholds applying, for example, in the ETS as opposed to Fuel EU? And then also regarding ship owners, they've been pushing for more stricter requirements on fuel suppliers. They said there's no guarantee that there will be alternative fuels available in the EU. Could you possibly give a few words on your opinion on that subject as well, please? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. When it comes to the gross tonnage, that is true that the ETS has another solution here, but we stick to the original solution from the Commission in my proposal. So I think in the trialogues now we have a strong position from the Parliament on Fuel EU Maritime, and it is not necessary that ETS and the Fuel EU Maritime align actually on this issue. So I hope that we can stick to the 500 gross tonnage. The reason for this is that with the 5,000 gross tonnage we reach 90% of the emissions. going down to 400 gross tonnage will mean that we, of course, there will be a lot more ships covered by this, but we will only get an additional 6% of reduction in CO2. So it is not as effective to go down to 400. Therefore, I think we will end up with this solution at the end. At least I hope so. The Parliament, of course, is very strong on this position. Then on the responsibility for if the responsibility should be with the ship owner or with the fuel supplier. This has been intense discussions, and there have been different proposals on this, and I've really get into the details of this and understand how this could work and not work. Now we have a situation where in this proposal, which also is a change from the Commission's proposal, which means that when there will be a contract between the two, and the supplier of fuels have signed on to supply a certain amount of fuel at a certain port, and if they cannot do that, then they will have to take the fines. So in that case, you can say that the responsibility is changed over to the fuel supplier instead. That is the proposal from the Parliament that we will fight for in the trialogue.
Thank you. For those who joined online a little bit later, just a reminder, if you have a question, click the raise hand button, I will come to you. Now the question goes to Hane. Please press the speak button.
Hi, thank you. I have a few questions, if you don't mind. The previous report already asked a similar question. I was wondering what the priorities will be in trialogues with the Council. So what do you expect to be the main dividing lines in talks with Council? What will be Parliament's priorities in those talks? That's a question for both MEPs. And specifically for Mr. Warborn, I was wondering whether there's already a date set for the first trialogue on FuelEU Maritime. And then another question, there was a push for higher targets for RFMBOs in FuelEU Maritime. Is there a specific reason why you don't support such a higher target? And for Mr. Ertug, the penalty system obviously failed to get enough support in the plenary. Do you consider that an important stake that was lost there? Do you think that will affect the impact of AFIR?
Thank you. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Ertug.
Yes, when it comes to the RFNBOs, I was the one who supported that, and I voted also accordingly a few hours ago in the plenary. Maybe this question should go to those who didn't vote on it. I voted for the 6%, by the way. And when it comes to my question regarding the penalties, so we all know in the European Parliament you have to defend your position in the trilogues against the member states. And they shouldn't understand me wrong, but my well-known quote is always when I say the biggest problem of the European Union are their member states, and this is once again a proof for it. And the AFID was also a proof for it. And the ambition of the European Parliament cannot be met with the general approach what has been taken under the French presidency. And when we compare the French presidency's general approach with the initial text of the European Commission, even there are disparities which would not lead us as European Union to that point where we normally should be later on in order to save the CO2 emission targets. And this was an additional tool. Colleagues told me, yeah, you can be happy you brought everything through. Yeah, that's right. But I tried to convince my colleagues on the so-called sanction mechanism, which could have been also a tool in my hand when I go into the trilogues to show the member state, look guys, the European Parliament, they are really serious when it comes to the targets and when it comes to the sanctions. Okay, we have to accept that, but I don't think that this will affect the outcome of AFIR. We have, as I told you in the previous question answer, we have several tools with which we will be able to bring our initiative through. And I really urge the member states move from their very restrictive and destructive position what they have taken under the French presidency.
Thank you. Mr. Warburton, please.
Yes, thank you very much for that question as well. When it comes to the trialogues, and especially on RFNBOs, I think it's good to point out that in the Commission's proposal, there is no RFNBOs. Now we have that in the Parliament position of 2%. It is true that it has been different proposals on this. There have been proposals of increasing this dramatically. The reason why we have landed in 2% is basically because of availability. We are, first of all, I think it would be much better to have a technology-neutral law from the first place. But now I support this deal, but we have safeguarded that in case there are no availability of RFNBOs, that was the main issue why we didn't want to raise it, basically. And there are also some safeguards so that the Commission now can adjust this if that is necessary due to availability, but both ways. They can adjust it both up and down. If there are a lot of availability and we do not reach the climate targets, they can still adjust it up. Or they can adjust it down if there is no availability. Because I think there is two situations I would like to avoid. First of all, we have to reach the climate targets. And if we don't do that, then the Commission could adjust. But we also have to make sure that the sector, the industry, the maritime sector, they have to be able to perform. If there are no availability of the fuels, then they will be hurt by fines in this situation, and that wouldn't be fair to the ship owners if they are heavily fined if there are no fuels available. So therefore, it's a balancing act, and I think the Parliament has landed in a very good and balanced, realistic position here. And the last question on the trialogue. Yes, it is set to the end of October already. I think it is the 27th, I'm not sure, but the end of October.
Thank you very much. Would you have any more questions? It doesn't seem to be the case, so thank you very much for joining this press conference. Thank you, rapporteurs, and good luck with the trial.